Chapter 15. How long had he been here, just a stone toss away from the road where 100 people must have passed him today alone? I took the seal, left the bag, and stood up. There was only one thing to do now, and that was to get the seal to Steedsley. Only before I could do that, I needed to get out of this spot. One false step and I'd be as stuck as Henry had been, or worse, Richard. At the same time, I knew I needed to hurry. George and his men could be back here at any moment. At last I found a dry path to follow along the ledge. As soon as the road dipped down to the river again, I plunged into the cold water, all the way up to my chest to clean my dress. It was perhaps poetic justice that I should find myself in such a position, after having forced so many others to do so for the sake of the seal. But it was easier to explain a wet dress than a muddy one, I reasoned with myself. And with my luck as it was, I would no doubt have to do some explaining before long. Dripping wet, I crossed the road and dashed into the trees, not stopping until I found a nice thicket to hide in. I had hidden the seal on my body before, but I had had the luxury of wearing an oversized coat then. I was going to have to be more creative this time. I undid my shawl and yanked at the fringe until I had a handful of yarn, which I cut with my teeth. I then wrapped several strands around the seal. The next step required me to secure the other end of the strings to my corset beneath my dress. Looking around to make doubly sure I was alone, I lifted my wet skirts. My stomacher had 2 rows of stitching on each side, both with heavy laces. I tied the yarn to the row left of my belly button, dropped my skirt, and stood up. I took a few test steps, only to realize that every time I moved, the seal banged against my left shin. Hard. It was going to be a long walk to Steedsley. The best way to get there, I decided, was the hardest way. I would have to take Connors Hill, east of the village, a slope that was covered in thick woods. It would be slow going, but I would have the most protection there. With squelching shoes, I started in that direction now, hoping that my clothes would dry quickly. Being in these woods made me feel as if I was 12 years old again, scrambling up the rocks after my father. If my teeth hadn't been chattering so hard, I would have smiled. But as I continued upward, the playful memory began to fade, replaced by a feeling that my father was not buried and dead, but walking with me now. It was as if, from across the valley of the shadow, that he had heard some whisper that his daughter was alone, and maybe even a little frightened. The feeling became so strong that I stopped more than once to look around. "Daddy," I whispered, "stay with me, just until we get to the house." I knew it was impossible. My father was locked deep in the darkness of the family tomb in the shadow of the new churchyard. But it was comforting to entertain the notion that he was close by. Only then I began to wonder what he would think of me 4 years later. Would he be proud? "Lisbette," I could hear him say, "what's all this about you flunking your classes? Is that any way for a Blackwood to behave?" "But, Daddy," I argued in my mind, "who could sit down and study in a city like Audleton? There was so much to see and so much to do." "And what's this I hear about credit card debts?" he said to me. I had to dress the part, I reasoned with him. I could hardly go around in my Eastern wear. "And how do you explain that forked tongue of yours?" I stopped in the middle of the hill. "How do you explain yours?" There was no answer. I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, but all I could see was shadows. I stood stock still because whoever had made that sound was no fox or opossum. One of the shadows lurched in my direction, and I did not wait to see who or what it was. I ran. The seal banged against my leg and twisted on its string around my knee. Then it had the gall to unwind and knock me in the other leg, causing me to stumble and fall. Someone snatched me by the shoulders and pulled me up. "I found the girl." I recognized Agent Saltz's voice. "She's over here." "Let me go. You have no right to hold me." "I told you I didn't like you," he said. "This time I'm taking you to the village, and I'm not letting you go until you tell me everything about this business. Maybe if your betrothed discovers we're charging you as an accomplice, he might even decide to come out of hiding." "Accomplice? I have nothing to do with Timothy Easton." "You're in this just as thick as he is. You've seen him, haven't you? Is he hiding at your house or in one of the tenant cottages? Does he have the seal?" I was trying to pull away the whole time, but his grip never slackened. "I told you, Timothy is nothing to me. I have no idea where he or the seal is." "We'll see about that, won't we?" He turned around. "Brett, where are you?" I didn't see Brett, but a blur broke through the trees and knocked both Agent Saltz and me to the ground where the air was knocked out of my chest. In the next 3 seconds I was rolled on, stepped on, and then finally abandoned. All the while, I was trying to inhale oxygen back into my chest. When my lungs finally managed to start working again, I got to my knees to see what had happened. It was quiet now, but Agent Saltz was lying motionless on the ground, and a man was standing over his body. I jerked back instinctively at the sight of the stranger, but the man stepped forward, and I found myself looking up into Timothy's face. He held out his hand, and I took it, and before I was even to my feet, he was already running. "Come on, we have to get away from here." "Ow!" I cried as the seal crashed into my already bruised shin. "Wait, can I—" "No, we have to run now." Somehow, with my options so minimized, I managed to find a running rhythm in which I was only knocked in the shin every 2 or 3 steps. It wasn't much of an improvement, but it was an improvement nonetheless. Even so, I never would have endured the pain if Timothy's life wasn't on the line. If he was found now, I knew for certain that I'd never see him again. Luckily, it was only a short distance to the base of the hill. We reached there, and he demanded, "What are you even doing out here, and why are you wet?" "I came out to look for—" "I told you this wasn't your affair anymore." "Yes, but now they'll think you're involved." "Trey, and how am I supposed to find Richard and look after you at the same time?" "Timothy, I'm trying to—" "Don't say you're sorry. What good is that going to do?" "I wasn't going to apologize. Will you listen to what I'm trying to say?" "And for the record, I don't want anything to do with you either." "What?" "You heard me." "Well, I didn't want to marry you first." "That's just fine." "Good," I said. "I'm glad we both feel the same way." I'm not sure how I went from point A, yelling at Timothy, to point B, being kissed by Timothy, but there I was, being held so tight I could feel my ribs cracking. I only remember thinking one thing: is this what it feels like to be struck by lightning? When the kiss finally ended, I stared at him breathlessly, waiting for what he could possibly have to say. Only when he did speak, it wasn't anything I was expecting. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just needed to try that one more time." I stood there dazed, trying to decipher what he had meant. "Well," he said, waiting for me to say something. "Well, what?" I said, still panting from holding my breath for so long. "Was it any different than the first one?" "The first what?" I heard him breathe hard through his nostrils. "Never mind." I was still trying to clear my head from the recent earthquake in my body when suddenly I remembered what I had been trying to tell Timothy in the first place. "Timothy, Trey and Henry are out here. If they're found again, they—" "Found again? Wait, what are you talking about?" "That's what I was trying to tell you. Your father came to my house an hour ago to tell us that Trey and Henry were missing. I found them nearby at the river, but then George and his men found us." "They found Henry?" "Yes, but they didn't recognize him." "Then you know who he is." "Well, yes," I said, feeling insulted. "I mean, I did live in Audleton for nearly 3 years, if you remember." He ignored this. "But they didn't recognize him. Are you sure about that?" "He was caked in mud at the time, so yes, I'm sure. George sent us home under guard, but then Trey took off in one direction and Henry took off in another. But just before that— Lisbette, go straight to the churchyard and hide at the vaults. Trey knows where to go. If he shows up, follow him back to the house. If not, wait for me. I have to go back for Henry. If they discover who he is, there's a good chance he could be dead before morning. You'll be all right. You know your way." "But Timothy—" He was already leaving. "Go." My shoulders slumped. He was already out of sight and out of earshot. Even so, I ventured to say, "I'm getting really mixed signals here." I lifted my skirts to look at my sore legs. It was too dark to see, but I could feel hot blood oozing down my torn and ruined stockings. I sighed. I suppose my real news could wait. I reached down and took the seal. As long as I was alone, I might as well be unmaidenly and carry it rather than have it beat me up any more. I scowled at the thing. "You know," I told it, "you are a lot of trouble."